Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Now, for all the serious aspirants waiting to appear for this year's prelims examination, RAU'S IAS brings you the third pre-parikshan test, and this will be conducted from 10th to 12th of September 2021. So, in order to appear for the test, register yourself on the ELEARN platform of RAU'S IAS. As through this test, you will get your All India ranking, which will help you in analyzing your strong and weak areas with respect to your preparation. And through this test, you will also get a comparative analysis with respect to your score as compared to other candidates in the competition. Further, there will also be a discussion which is scheduled on 13th September 2021 based on the paper appearing for your third pre-parikshan. So what are you waiting for? Register yourself on eLearn and do attempt the test scheduled from 10th to 12th of September 2021.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 8th of September 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on the screen. Time-stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now this particular article appears on page number 6 in the form of an editorial. The article is titled as Making Them Pay. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy. Before I discuss this particular article in much greater detail, let me first discuss the background first. Now let's say there is a startup company which has developed a gaming app. So this gaming app has to get listed on the App Store for the users to be downloaded. So what option does this startup company has? Now presently we have approximately around 300 plus app stores. These include the Google Play Store, the Apple iStore, the Samsung Galaxy Store, Amazon App Store and so on. But right now this App Store ecosystem, it has come to be dominated by just two players, that is the Google Play Store and the Apple iStore. So effectively the startup company has no choice. The startup company has to get its app listed compulsorily on the Google Play Store as well as the Apple iStore so that the app is available to a large number of users to be downloaded. So in a way, the Google company and the Apple company enjoys dominance in the App Store ecosystem. And this dominance enjoyed by these two companies is in turn used by them in order to further strengthen their market dominance and also exploit the app developers. Now, for example, once the app is developed and if the app developers want to get their app listed on these app stores, the application developers will be required to make certain amount of initial payment in order to get their app listed on these app stores. That's the first thing. Secondly, see, once an app is downloaded by the users may also make certain in-app purchases. Now, let's say you have downloaded a gaming app. Now in this gaming app, you can make certain in-app purchases such as you can purchase certain amount of coins or you can make certain in-app purchases in order to further strengthen your armory, weapons, etc. So when such in-app purchases are to be made by the customers, the application developers as such should have choices as to what kind of payment methods they would want to use. But right now the application developers do not have any choice with respect to what kind of payment methods they can use. Compulsorily, they would have to use the billing system which has been developed by Google as well as Apple. For example, in the Google Play Store, the application developers must compulsorily use the Google billing system for accepting the payments from the customers. Whereas in case of Apple, the application developers should use the billing system which has been developed by Apple for the acceptance of such payments. So once again here, the application developers do not have any choice as to what kind of payment methods they can use in order to accept the payment from the customers. Secondly, even within their own billing system, companies here, they give preference to their own payment system over and above their rival payment systems. For example, in this particular case, the Google here gives higher preference to its payment system, that is Google Pay, over and above its rivals such as Paytm, PhonePe, etc. The same goes even with Apple also, wherein Apple tries to promote its own payment system in the form of the Apple Pay. Thirdly, whenever the app developers get certain amount of money from the customers through the in-app purchases, these app developers are required to pay certain amount of commission to Google as well as Apple. And this commission ranges from approximately around 15% to 30%. Now, for example, let's say a particular customer has made an in-app purchase of rupees 100. So out of this rupees 100, at least like 15 to 30 rupees will be paid in a form of commission to Google as well as Apple. So clearly, as you can see here, both Google as well as Apple, they are abusing their market dominant position. First and foremost, they are forcing the app developers to make the one-time payment to get their apps listed. Secondly, they are not giving a choice to the app developers with respect to the billing system. Within their own billing system, they are giving higher preference to their own payment system over their rivals. And thirdly, they are charging a higher amount of commission, which ranges from 15 to 30% from the app developers. So clearly here, it is a threat to the app ecosystem. Particularly, if you look at the number of mobile apps which have been downloaded in case of India, it has increased by almost around 190% in the last 3 years alone. And most of these mobile apps, they are actually made by various startups. Now just imagine as to what would happen if these startups end up paying almost like 15 to 30% in the form of commission for the in-app purchases. Obviously, the amount of profits earned by the startups would reduce, and this would have an adverse impact on the app ecosystem. Thirdly, as you all must be aware, right now we are focusing on ensuring the Atmanirbhar Bharat. One critical aspect of Atmanirbhar Bharat is to have the digital sovereignty. But the problem here is the dominance of the big technological giants such as Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. This goes not only against the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat, but it also violates our digital sovereignty. Previously, companies such as the East India Company, they used to drain our wealth. But now, these technological giants, they are draining away our data. So they are taking away our data, they are analyzing and processing the data, and by doing that, they're able to enjoy the dominance. So clearly the dominance of the big technological giants goes against the very foundation of the digital sovereignty which India is aspiring for. So whatever developments which I have discussed here, this is not very specific to India. The same problems has been occurring even in other countries as well. It is behind this particular backdrop, recently the South Korean parliament has passed a law which is also referred to as the anti-Google law. This anti-Google law has been basically formulated in order to check the growing dominance of Google as well as Apple in the App Store ecosystem. So as I said, right now Google as well as Apple do not give a choice to the app developers as to what kind of billing system they can adopt. So in order to put an end to such a practice, this South Korean law gives the necessary freedom to the app developers to choose any payment system which they want to for accepting the in-app purchases from the customers. So this particular law passed by South Korean parliament is all about giving more number of choices to the app developers with respect to the usage of the payment system. The passage of such a law in South Korea has a lot of relevance even for India as well. This is because recently a NGO based in Rajasthan has filed a complaint before the Competition Commission of India against the Apple company for the abuse of its dominant market position. Secondly, last year there was a controversy between the Google Play Store and the Paytm app, wherein the Google Play Store decided to take down the Paytm app from its App Store for certain duration of time. Google had argued that the Paytm app had violated its rules and regulations. And thirdly, in response to this particular controversy between Google and Paytm, the Paytm app had then launched its own mini App Store. So all of these recent developments which have taken place in the App Store ecosystem becomes quite important from the perspective of the UPSC mains examination. So from the perspective of the mains examination, one should be aware as to how the dominance of big tech is hurting the economy, why there is a need for Made in India App Store, and what should be done in order to break the monopoly of the multinational companies in the mobile app ecosystem. So as far as this particular article is concerned, this particular article is basically arguing that Since South Korea has come up with a law in order to check the digital monopolies, even in case of India, we need to come out with a new law to check the monopolies of the Google as well as Apple. As far as the main question for practice for this particular question is concerned, in the light of the recent concerns raised by the app developers in India, discuss the need for developing Made in India App Store to ensure the digital sovereignty. See, so far as part of the background discussion, I have discussed as to how the dominance of big tech would hurt the economy. As far as the next two topics is concerned, that is the need for Made in India App Store and what should be done to break the monopoly of multinational companies. I have discussed these two topics in much greater detail in the DNS dated 9th of October 2020. This particular DNS I had discussed in the context of the controversy which had then arisen between Google and Paytm. So what I would do here is I would attach the previous DNS video of 9th of October 2020 so that you would be able to understand the next two parts of the article. So once you understand these two parts of the article, you should be in a position to write an answer to this particular mains question for the practice. So let us try to understand as to why should India needs to have its own homegrown app store like the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore. First and foremost, as we have discussed, the multinational companies such as Google as well as Apple, they are abusing the dominant position which they have in the mobile app ecosystem. Now, for example, presently there are more than 300 plus app stores from where we can download the mobile apps. For example, some of the app stores are the Google Play Store, the Apple iStore, the Samsung Galaxy Store, the Amazon App Store, and so on. In spite of availability of so many choices in the app stores for the downloading of the mobile apps, most of us either use the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore depending upon the operating system of our phone. Why do you think we end up using the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore, and why not the other app stores? This is because our phones come preloaded with these inbuilt app stores. Now, for example, if I buy a Samsung mobile phone that comes preloaded with the Google Play Store, then I would continue to use the Google Play Store rather than using the Samsung Galaxy Store. But the question is, why do these smartphones come with the inbuilt app stores? Now, Google is the one which has developed the Android operating system. Even though Google claims that the Android operating system is a free and open software, in reality, Google company has a form of agreement with various smartphone handset makers, wherein through such agreement, the Google company forces these handset makers to incorporate various Google mobile apps such as the Google Map, Google Chrome, Google Play Store, etc. So if your phone comes preloaded with the Google Chrome, then you won't download the other browsers such as Brave, Mozilla Firefox, Internet Explorer, Opera, etc. So by the virtue of the dominant position which the multinational companies enjoy, they are in a way hindering the development of the other app stores. The second aspect is related to the unfair practices followed by these multinational companies. Now, for example, let's say you have developed a particular mobile app which seeks to provide education to the school students. First and foremost, in order to enable you to get this mobile app listed on the App Store, you would have to pay money to the Google or the Apple company. Secondly, whenever any student pays you money for the utilization of the paid features on this particular app, a certain percentage of commission would have to be paid to these app stores. Now, for example, in case of the Apple company, the commission is as high as 30%. Even the Google company had recently declared that it would charge 30% commission for all the in-app purchases that are done on the gaming apps. However, this particular imposition of charge by the Google company was in turn opposed by a large number of app developers within India, and accordingly the Google company has decided to postpone the charging of commission to the next year. Apart from this, the Google company has also stated that if a particular customer is making any kind of in-app purchases, then all such in-app purchases has to take place through the Google Pay and not through the other payment platforms. So the Google company has stated that some of the categories of apps that are listed on the Play Store which accept the payment from the customers, they should have to compulsorily use the Google Pay for accepting the payment. So if you look at the unfair practices followed by these multinational companies, first and foremost, companies such as Google, they have developed their own operating system They claim that the Android operating system is free and open software, but they eventually force the companies, mobile manufacturing companies, to incorporate their own Play Store. They charge money from the app developers. Not do they charge just the money, they also collect, store and analyze huge amount of data, and through that they are able to make huge amount of profits. And since they have deep pockets and since they are well established, they are in a way able to stifle competition from their smaller rivals. The next aspect is related to lack of choice to the consumers and the app developers. Out of the total population of 1.3 to 1.4 billion, India has almost around 700 million unique mobile phone subscribers. Globally, the app downloads have increased by 45% in the last 3 years. However, in the last 3 years, the mobile app downloads have increased by almost around 190% in case of India. So India has emerged as one of the most dominant mobile app market across the world in the last 3 years. And since we live in a free market economy, people like me and you should have adequate amount of choice to choose as to which app store do we want to use in order to download the mobile apps. However, in the present ecosystem, we do not have a choice in choosing the app store which we want to use. In a way, we are being forced to use either the Play Store or the Apple iStore. The same can be said even about the app developers as well, wherein they do not have necessary freedom to choose as to which app store they would want to upload their mobile apps. The next aspect is related to the setback to the domestic app ecosystem. The Indian domestic mobile app industry has grown by leaps and bounds. Prime Minister Modi has recently highlighted that the digital gaming has a huge potential at the international level. He has called upon the Indian entrepreneurs to take a lead and develop the apps to boost the mobile app ecosystem. But in the present ecosystem dominated by Google and Apple, an entrepreneur faces multiple costs as well as risk. First and foremost, he is required to pay charges to the Apple iStore or the Google Play Store in order to get his app listed. If he lists his apps on other app stores such as Samsung Store or the Amazon Store, he may not get the due visibility. He is required to pay a certain amount of commission to these app stores for the purchases done by the customers. He is required to comply with the unfair rules and conditions laid down by these multinational companies. And in absence of regulation, as a recent Paytm issue has highlighted, an entrepreneur faces a risk of his app being brought down without any kind of mechanism for the redressal of the grievances. So, having an indigenously developed app store would help us address these problems faced by the app developers. Further, the regulation of the app stores through an independent authority would help us lay down clear rules and guidelines over various aspects of the listing of the mobile apps on the app stores. The last aspect is related to the digital sovereignty. Both Google as well as Apple have been able to collect a lot of data from their app stores, such as what kind of apps have you downloaded, how much money have you paid for these apps. Now all of these data, including the critical payment related data, gets stored in the overseas servers. This is then used in order to target various kinds of advertisements towards the users. So this particular aspect fundamentally goes against the policy of the data localization which the government has enunciated. Now under the data localization, the government wants that whatever data is generated within India, that data should compulsorily be stored in the servers which are physically located within India. So such a form of data localization in turn has the capacity to boost the digital ecosystem in India. Apart from that, a homegrown app store will also enable the startup companies as well as the domestic companies to get listed without paying any charges, to accept payments from the customers without paying any kind of commission to these app stores. So this in a way will be able to give a push to the mobile app ecosystem. Now coming to last dimension as to what steps should be taken in order to boost the mobile app ecosystem and promote the indigenous development of App Store in India. First and foremost, obviously we would have to find alternatives to the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore. one of the most viable alternative happens to be the Mobile Seva App Store. The Mobile Seva App Store is a M-governance application that has been developed by Ministry of Electronics and Communication. This Mobile Seva App Store basically enables the download of various government apps for the provision of various government services. Apart from that, the Mobile Seva App Store also provides for the free listing of various apps in India. For example, apps such as Paytm, Uber, Ola, etc. can get listed on the Mobile Seva App Store. Now, recently, the government of India has stated that it would try to promote the Mobile Seva App Store as a full-fledged app store on the lines of the Google Play Store. Now, this strategy of the government of India needs to be fast-tracked and implemented at the earliest. Secondly, as highlighted at the start of our discussion, recently Paytm app has decided to launch its own version of Play Store, which is referred to as the Android Mini App Store. Now, how is this Mini App Store launched by Paytm app different from the Play Store of Google? So in case of the normal App Store, such as the Google Play Store, one needs to download the application into the phone in order to access it. However, in case of the Mini App Store, this is considered to be a web-based service that provides access to various apps as if they are downloaded on your mobile. Now, for example, let's say if you want to access Uber, Zomato or Ola on your mobile phone, there are two options. One, you can download these applications from the Google Play Store. The other option is you can have access to these applications through the Paytm Mini app without downloading them. Now, for example, as you can see here, if you want to have access to the Mini App Store, you have to click on this particular link. The link then takes you to the Mini App Store where there is a listing of all the apps. Now, once you click on any of these apps would not get downloaded. Rather, these apps would get opened in the web browser. So one of the biggest advantage of the Mini App Store is, first and foremost, it saves the phone memory because there is no need to install the mobile apps. And secondly, it saves the data as well, which otherwise gets used up for downloading the mobile apps. So the Mini App Store in a way acts as a super app. It is quite different from the other app stores. It does not require the download of apps, and hence it is considered to be superior over the existing app stores. So going forward, we need to encourage companies with large traffic on their mobile applications such as Amazon, Flipkart, Swiggy, Uber, etc. to have their own mini app stores. Nextly, we have to realize that we cannot be self-reliant in the field of mobile app ecosystem without being self-reliant in mobile phone manufacturing. Most of the mobile phones which are sold in India are basically Chinese, and these Chinese mobile phones come preloaded with their own apps as well as Play Stores. So going forward, we need to boost the indigenous manufacturing of mobile phones in India. Just like how the Android operating system comes preloaded with the Google applications, we need to ensure that the mobile phones manufactured in India come preloaded with our App Store, such as the Mobile Seva App Store. And lastly, we need to strengthen the role of the Competition Commission of India in order to handle the abuse of the dominant position by the multinational companies such as Google as well as Apple. Now, this particular article appears on page number 6 in the form of an editorial. The article is titled as Nipah Amidst a Pandemic. See, we all are grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. Amidst this development, there has been a news of the outbreak of Nipah virus in the state of Kerala, which has already claimed one life. So in recent years, there has been increase in the frequency of number of epidemics such as malaria, dengue, chikungunya, swine flu, avian influenza, and so on. It is against this particular backdrop, the recent COVID-19 pandemic, it should serve as a wake-up call for us. We need to identify as to what mistakes did we commit in countering the COVID-19 pandemic. These lessons should then be used in order to counter the recent outbreak of Nipah virus. Now, for example, the recent COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that the present framework to deal with the biological disasters in case of India, this framework is grossly inadequate. So we need to learn as to what are the present problems in dealing with the biological disasters, and these lessons that we learn we should use it in order to counter the Nipah virus. So as far as your prelims examination is concerned, from the perspective of the prelims examination, one should know about certain important details about the Nipah virus. Now, these details about the Nipah virus, which become important from the perspective of the prelims examination, have been covered in our DNS dated 6th of September 2021. As far as the mains examination is concerned, here you should understand as to what is the present framework for dealing with the biological disasters in India, what are the present problems, and how these problems would have to be addressed. So a mains question for the practice from this particular topic would be, the recent outbreak of the communicable diseases has highlighted the need to focus on the biological disasters. Discuss the strategies to deal with such disasters in India. Now, based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attend these two prelims questions for the practice. According to National Disaster Management Authority, the biological disasters can be defined as large-scale spread of diseases among the human beings, animals, and plants due to various kinds of microorganisms. So if you look at the definition of the biological disasters, there are certain important things which you should note here. First and foremost, when we say biological disasters, here it refers not only to the spread of diseases among the human beings, but it also refers to the spread of diseases among the animals as well as plants. So even the swine flu, avian influenza, etc., they can also be considered as a biological disasters. Secondly, see, the biological disasters can either be natural or man-made. So when we say natural, it could be because of outbreak of various diseases. And when we say man-made, it can be a case of bioterrorism or use of biological weapons. Thirdly, see, when we say biological disasters, the biological disasters could either be gradual or it could be sudden. Now, for example, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic or that of the Nipah virus, it can be considered to be a sudden since it quickly spreads across the population. But if you look at the spread of the HIV, so in comparison to say COVID-19 or Nipah virus, the spread of HIV infection among the population is little slower. But look at the impact that the HIV can have on the human population. Look at its overall geographical spread. So because of these reasons, even the outbreak of HIV among a particular population can also be considered as a biological disaster. As far as the present framework for dealing with the biological disasters in India is concerned, first and foremost, as you know, health as a subject, it has been placed under the state list, which means that the primary responsibility to respond to the biological disasters rests with the concerned state government. As far as the central government is concerned, the central government's role is to support the state governments in dealing with various kinds of biological disasters. When it comes to a legal framework, we have the British era law, that is the Epidemic Diseases Act 1897. Now this particular act empowers the state governments to take all the necessary steps to deal with the biological disasters. For example, under this particular act, the state governments can make various kinds of temporary provisions in order to restrict the movement of the people. Similarly, the state governments can make certain rules, certain regulations to be observed by the common public. As far as the role of the central government is concerned, now the role of the central government under this particular act is quite limited. The central government can carry out the inspection of bus, trains, ships. It can also detain a person. But overall, it is the state governments that have the primary responsibility to deal with the biological disasters. Nextly, see, whenever a country faces a public health emergency, it is quite possible that such a public health emergency can actually spread from one country to another. So in order to prevent the outbreak of the public health emergencies at the global level, that is at the world level, we need to have a necessary coordination between the multiple countries. So that coordination between the multiple countries is achieved through the international health regulations. The international health regulation was adopted during the World Health Assembly in the year 2005 and it has come into being in the year 2007. So the international health regulations can be considered as a legally binding instrument to be followed by all the member states. So as part of the international health regulations, the member states should notify the World Health Organization about any public health emergencies that may have taken place in their own country. And they should notify the World Health Organization within 24 hours. These regulations also require the member countries to enhance their overall capacity to respond to the public health emergencies. So, as highlighted before, the recent outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the fundamental flaws in our framework to deal with the biological disasters. Accordingly, we need to identify as to what are those flaws and accordingly address these flaws so as to deal with the future biological disasters in a more integrated and a comprehensive manner. First and foremost, there is a need to strengthen the legal framework. As discussed before, presently under the Epidemic Diseases Act 1897, it is the primary responsibility of the respective state government to respond to the biological disasters. As far as the role of the central government is concerned, the role of the central government is quite limited to the inspection of bus, train or ships and detention of the persons. Accordingly, it has been highlighted that the central government as such does not have sufficient amount of powers to deal with the epidemics. Accordingly, in order to strengthen the legal framework, we need to amend the British era law, that is the Epidemic Diseases Act 1897, and give sufficient amount of powers to the central government to respond to the epidemics. That's the first strategy. Secondly, there is a need to strengthen the institutional framework. See, in case of India, we have all India services such as the Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service, Indian Forest Service and so on. So these all India services have led to the modernization of the Indian administration. But if you look at our healthcare administration even today continues to be quite outdated. It has not been modernized. That is why we need to create an all India health service on the lines similar to the Indian Administrative Service. So automatically this will lead to a large scale improvement in our healthcare administration. Secondly, in case of USA, there is an organization known as the National Science Advisory Board for the Biosecurity. Now this particular organization provides all the necessary inputs to the government as to how to deal with the outbreak of epidemics as well as the biological weapons. Similarly, in case of India, we need to have a separate and dedicated institution which can provide the necessary policy inputs to the government for dealing with the biological disasters. The next aspect is about strengthening the operational framework. See, as highlighted before, in case of India, there has been increase in the frequency of various kinds of epidemics. In spite of that, even today, we do not have a separate policy on the biological disasters. This shows that so far we have attached very less importance for the biological disasters. We have come up with a separate policy on dealing with droughts, floods, etc. But we do not have a policy on how to deal with the biological disasters. Accordingly, going forward, there is a need to have a separate policy on the biological disasters. In particular, such a policy should come out with a standard operating procedure on the biological disasters. Such a standard operating procedure should lay down the roles and responsibilities of each and every organization which is involved in management of disasters. Such a standard operating procedure should lay adequate amount of emphasis on surveillance on the outbreak of diseases. So as soon as a disease breaks out in a particular area or a locality, we should be able to know the outbreak of such an epidemic, and as soon as we come to know about it, we need to take the urgent steps in order to prevent the outbreak of such diseases. The next aspect is about strengthening the financial framework. See, presently in case of India, we have a separate fund known as the National Calamity Contingency Fund. The money into this particular fund comes from the National Calamity Contingency Duty, which is basically a kind of additional excise duty that we impose on various petroleum products. So this additional excise duty that we impose on various petroleum products, we call it as the National Calamity Contingency Duty, and the money then goes into the National Calamity Contingency Fund. This particular fund is in turn used to deal with various kinds of disasters such as droughts, floods, tsunamis, etc. Now, according to the present guidelines of the government, the National Calamity Contingency Fund can be used to deal with various kinds of disasters which have been explicitly mentioned. So, the disasters such as droughts, floods, tsunami, etc. they have been explicitly mentioned in the guidelines as to how the National Calamity Contingency Fund would have to be utilized for. The problem here is The biological disasters as such have not been explicitly laid down in the guidelines with respect to the usage of this fund. Accordingly, the National Disaster Management Authority has recommended that we need to bring the biological disasters explicitly under the purview of the National Calamity Contingency Fund. Nextly, presently we are implementing the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program in order to carry out the surveillance as well as monitoring of the outbreak of diseases in the initial stages. But as highlighted by the National Disaster Management Authority, the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program is not effectively implemented, particularly in the rural areas. So we need to identify the importance of this particular program. So this program helps us identify the outbreak of diseases in the initial stage. So if we come to know the outbreak of a disease in the initial stage, we can take urgent steps in order to prevent its outbreak. So there is a need to strengthen the integrated disease surveillance program going forward. Next, we need to strengthen the network of diagnostic laboratories. We need to keep adequate amount of medicines and vaccines to deal with various kinds of epidemics. And lastly, we need to have improved human resources, particularly nurses, doctors, etc., to deal with the outbreak of various epidemics. So these are some of the strategies which can be adopted in order to deal with various kinds of epidemics in India. So these are some of the important things which you should know from the perspective of the mains examination. As far as the prelims MCQ is concerned, look at the prelims MCQ number 2. It says, consider the following statements related to the legal and constitutional framework to deal with the disasters in India. The first statement is the disaster management is a subject which has been placed under the concurrent list. Please do understand here that disaster management as a subject, it is not explicitly placed under the concurrent list. In fact, the central government or the parliament has come up with the Disaster Management Act 2005 by invoking entry 23 in the concurrent list. In particular, entry 23 in the concurrent list talks about social insurance and social protection, employment and unemployment. So as such, disaster management as a subject is not explicitly placed under the concurrent list. That is why the Second Administrative Reforms Commission had recommended that we need to have a separate entry of disaster management in the concurrent list. The second statement is the center has the powers over preventing the spread of diseases from one state to another. This statement here is correct. Accordingly, the right answer to this particular question would be B, that is 2 only. As far as the prelims MCQ number 1 is concerned, please try to find out the answer on your own and let me know the answer in the comment section given below. Now the next article appears on page number 6. The article is titled as The Economic Reforms Looking Back to Look Ahead. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy. See, the Indian economy has come a long way since the 1991 LPG reforms. The overall GDP size of India has increased from $275 billion in the year 1991 to $2.9 trillion right now. India is also considered to be among the top 5 largest economies across the world. And prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, India was also considered to be the fastest growing economies across the world. In spite of these sustained and credible gains, so far we have neglected certain important aspects. The government of India has come up with a vision of ensuring a $5 trillion economy by the end of 2025. It has also come up with a vision of doubling the farmers' income by the end of 2022. So going forward, if we have to achieve these ambitious goals, whatever things which we have neglected so far, these things we would have to look into and accordingly address these constraints and challenges. So this particular article here discusses as to what all important aspects should India focus upon going forward in order to achieve these ambitious goals. Now, based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attend these 2 prelims questions for the practice. As far as the discussion of this particular article is concerned, the various points which I am discussing as part of this particular article, you could incorporate these points either in your essay paper or while writing an answer in the UPSC mains GS paper 3 Indian Economy. The first main problem which has been highlighted in this particular article is with respect to low human capital formation in India. See, we all know that India has the world's second highest population after China. India is also witnessing the demographic dividend, wherein more than 50% of our population is in the working age group. So we need to utilize our human resources in order to promote higher GDP growth rate. And in order to utilize our human resources, we need to provide them with the necessary education. We need to take care of the healthcare needs. We need to provide them with the necessary skill set. We need to provide them with adequate number of jobs and so on. Only then we would be able to utilize the human resources in order to promote higher GDP growth rate. But the problem here is we have failed on all of these aspects. For example, even today we are underspending on both education as well as health. Our expenditure on health is only around 1.5% of GDP, whereas our expenditure on education is only around 3% of the GDP. Secondly, if you look at the penetrations of skills in case of India, according to the Periodic Labour Force Survey Report 2017-18, only 13% of India's workforce in the working age group of 15 to 59 are trained. Now, out of this 13%, what is surprising here is only 2% of India's workforce has got the formal training. The remaining 11% of the India's workforce, they have got actually the informal training. So the overall penetration of the formal training even today is quite lower. Nextly, if you look at the overall employment in case of India, the employment elasticity is calculated to be at 0.1. What this means is for every 1% increase in the GDP growth rate, the employment growth rate is only around 0.1%. So the employment elasticity is 0.1 in case of India. So this has in turn raised concerns over the jobless growth. Apart from the concerns over less number of jobs being created in case of India, concerns have also been raised over the quality of jobs that we are creating. This is so because even today 90% of India's workforce are actually the informal workers. Now these informal workers, they do not have job security, they do not have work security, they do not have access to social security benefits and so on. So all of these factors clearly highlight that the human capital formation in case of India is quite lower. In fact, in order to highlight the low human capital formation in India, the author of this particular article has highlighted India's poor ranking on the Global Human Capital Report 2017. Please do make a note that this particular report is published by the World Economic Forum. So this low human capital formation has in turn had an adverse impact on the Indian economy in terms of the lower productivity of the workers, higher levels of poverty, low income levels of the people, and lack of inclusive growth and development. The second aspect which has been highlighted in this particular article is with respect to lack of development of the manufacturing sector in India. See, the share of the manufacturing sector to our GDP as well as employment, this has remained stagnant since the 1991 economic reforms. Even today, the share of the manufacturing sector to our GDP, this is approximately around 16 to 17%, and this has remained same since 1991 economic reforms. And its share of employment is around 12%, and once again this has remained same since 1991 economic reforms. Secondly, ideally the manufacturing sector in case of India should have been dominated by the labor-intensive industries. But unfortunately, the manufacturing sector has come to be dominated by the capital-intensive industries. Thirdly, the manufacturing sector has come to be dominated by the micro, small and medium enterprises, which alone account for around 45% of the manufacturing output in India. But the problem here is most of the MSMEs, they are considered to be draft size MSMEs. So the draft size MSMEs means that these MSMEs, they are actually more than 10 years old, yet in spite of that, they continue to employ less than 100 people. See, ideally, these MSMEs which are old, which are more than 10 years old, they should have grown into bigger giants and they should have employed more number of workers. But these MSMEs, they have continued to remain smaller. One of the basic reasons as to why these MSMEs have continued to remain smaller is because of the government incentives. So the government gives a number of incentives to MSMEs. Incentives such as the priority sector lending, guaranteed public procurement and so on. Now these incentives as such are applicable only to MSMEs and they are not applicable to large size industries. So if a particular MSME, if it becomes a large size industry, then such an MSME would not be able to get these incentives from the government. So because of the fear of losing out from the government incentives, these industries, they'll continue to remain smaller rather than grow into the bigger giants. So these small size MSMEs, they have adopted low level of technology. The manufacturing competitiveness of these MSMEs is also low, and they have failed to create enough number of jobs. So going forward, in order to develop the manufacturing sector in case of India, we need to design the incentives in such a manner that the incentives should be given only to the new MSMEs. Say only the new MSMEs which are say around 5 years old, only such new MSMEs should get these government incentives. Once an MSME is more than 5 years old, such MSME should not be able to get these incentives from the government. This is the first thing. Secondly, another reason as to why the manufacturing sector has failed to develop in case of India is because of the cumbersome land acquisition. Quite often the private sector has to pass through multiple procedures, multiple rules, regulations, etc. in order to acquire the land. In order to do away with the problems associated with the land acquisition, what we need to do is we need to follow a model known as the plug and play model. Under the plug and play model, respective state governments, they should acquire the land on their own. Once the land is acquired, they should develop all the necessary infrastructure such as say buildings, roads, provision of electricity and so on. So once this basic infrastructure is ready, this basic infrastructure can then be leased out to the private sector. So the private sector here would not be required to acquire the land. It will not be required to create the basic infrastructure such as roads, electricity and so on. All of these basic aspects will be taken care by the respective state government. So under the plug and play model, the private sector would have to simply lease out this particular land or the basic infrastructure and immediately start manufacturing. In fact, some of the state governments such as Maharashtra have already come up with the plug and play model. So going forward, even the other states need to replicate the plug and play model in order to boost the manufacturing sector. And lastly, we need to facilitate access to various factors of production, particularly the labor as well as capital. In particular, the recently passed labor codes by the Indian Parliament, this is a step in the right direction. As far as capital is concerned, we need to take care of the capital by reducing the NPAs of the banks. We need to strengthen the bond market and so on. The next problem is with respect to the agriculture sector. So presently the agriculture sector employs around 40% of the India's workforce, and that is why the agriculture sector is considered to be the backbone of the Indian economy. However, the growth rate of the agriculture sector is below the targeted growth rate of 4%. So on one hand, the services sector grow in case of India at almost double digit of 11 to 12%, whereas the agriculture sector, it grows at below 4%. Nextly, see, India has come a long way with respect to production of agricultural commodities. Earlier, we used to face a shortage of agricultural commodities, but now India has emerged as one of the largest producers of food grains. Now the problem has shifted from scarcity of food grains to the surplus amount of food grains. So this increase in production should have led to a commensurate increase in the income levels of the farmers. But unfortunately, the income levels of the farmers has remained stagnant. Nextly, even though India is one of the largest producers of agricultural commodities, India's share in the global export of agricultural commodities is hardly around 2%, and India is placed at 9th position. So in order to address all of these problems associated with the agriculture sector, we need to implement the recommendations of the Dalwai panel on doubling of farmers' income. In particular, the Dalwai panel has identified that in order to double the income levels of the farmers, we would have to reduce the input cost such as seeds, fertilizers, labor, and so on. Secondly, we would have to enhance the overall productivity of the agriculture land. And thirdly, we would have to ensure that the farmers are able to get remunerative prices on their agricultural produce. In particular, we would have to reform the agricultural marketing. In this particular aspect, the recently passed Farm Acts by the Indian Parliament seeks to provide the necessary freedom to the farmers to sell their agricultural produce wherever and whomsoever they would want to. Now, this was one of the recommendations given by the Dalwai panel, and hence the recently passed Farm Acts are once again a step in the right direction in order to ensure the doubling of the income levels of the farmers. The next aspect is with respect to the poor innovation ecosystem. See, if we have to become a $5 trillion economy, we would have to spend substantial amount of money on research and development. In terms of absolute value, the gross investment in research and development has tripled in the last decade. But if you look at our expenditure on research and development as a share of our GDP, that is as percentage of GDP, this has remained stagnant at 0.7% in the last decade. So we are underspending on research and development. In particular, most of the investment in research and development is basically coming from the public sector, that is the government. The private sector investment in research and development is quite lower. Accordingly, in order to address these problems, we need to increase the gross expenditure on research and development to at least around 2% of India's GDP. This was a recommendation given by the Economic Survey 2020-2021. In particular, in order to increase our gross expenditure on research and development, we would have to provide incentives to the private sector to increase its investment on research and development. And lastly, we need to promote more of collaboration between the industries and universities in order to enhance the innovation ecosystem in India. So these are some of the present challenges as identified in the article, and these challenges can be addressed by the strategies which I have discussed. So this is what you must understand from the perspective of this particular article. As far as prelims, the MCQ number 3 and 4 is concerned, please do let us know the answer in the comment section given below. With this, let us take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 10. The article is titled as Prime Minister urges the private sector to help improve the quality in government schools. Now, this particular article talks about a newly launched scheme known as Vidyanjali 2.0. Now, this particular scheme becomes quite important because, as you can see in prelims 2017, there was a direct question related to the Vidyanjali Yojana. So let us understand some important aspects about the Vidyanjali 2.0 from the perspective of the prelims examination. See, Vidyanjali 2.0 scheme is being implemented by the Ministry of Education. The basic objective of this particular scheme is to strengthen the school through the involvement of community as well as private sector. As part of this particular initiative, we are trying to connect the government schools with the volunteers from Indian diaspora, particularly the volunteers such as the young professionals, school alumni, in-service and retired teachers, and so on. So these volunteers as such, they can basically involve in two set of activities in order to improve the overall quality of education. As you can see in the first set of activity, that is service or activity category, the volunteers can involve in various kinds of activities such as providing the subject assistance, teaching art and craft, teaching yoga and sports, teaching various languages, providing support to the students for preparing competitive exams and so on. In the second set of category, that is assets or material category, here the volunteers can provide various kinds of materials to the school infrastructure, such as say digital infrastructure, providing the various material for the classroom needs, maintenance and repairs, teaching, learning material, and so on. So these are some important aspects which you should know from the perspective of Vidyanjali 2.0 scheme. The next article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as Refining the Reservation Policy. See, recently two important developments have taken place with respect to reservation in India. First and foremost, the Parliament of India has passed the 127th Constitutional Amendment Bill. Through this particular bill, the states as well as union territories have been empowered to specify their own list of socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. Secondly, the Supreme Court of India has ruled that economic criteria alone cannot be the basis for determining the creamy layer for the purpose of reservation. It is against this particular backdrop, the article which has appeared in today's newspaper basically discusses as to how to further refine the reservation policy. So if you want to understand the article which has appeared in today's newspaper, I suggest you to go to the DNS dated 11th of August 2021 as well as 25th of August 2021. The links to these two DNS videos have been provided in the description box below. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Let us have a look at the question for the day. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option D.